Hello and welcome back to Ronnie the Reader. Today we are going to be discussing the one and only Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the newest and latest release by Suzanne Collins, obviously author of the Hunger Games series. This book is going to be following Haymitch, who is the victor of our second quarter quell, so the 50th Hunger Games. As far as what we know about this book, I personally don't know too much going into it. I kind of only know that it is about Haymitch. I'm not super familiar with any of the other details. I know there are some things that have been released so far that people have read. I have kind of stayed away from everything that is relating to this book so far. So I'm kind of going into it just really blind, not knowing what to expect and not knowing what is kind of the purpose of the story. I've heard some of the themes that have been going around as far as kind of exploring propaganda and the psychological effects of just like marketing in some sort of way. I don't really know if that's true or what. So I'm excited to be diving into this. This video is going to be structured in mostly a kind of vlog-ish style. I'm going to be doing some parts. I have decided that I'm going to be updating you after each section. So part one, part two, part three of the book. And then I'm just going to be giving you my thoughts on each of those sections and each of those parts, and then kind of coming in at the end and doing a quick wrap up. So this whole video is going to be spoiler filled. So if you haven't yet read the book, which I'm posting this a week after it has been released, definitely go and read the book and then come back and, visit us. I haven't yet started it, so I don't know what my thoughts are yet, but I am really hopeful. I'm really excited, but I am a little nervous because the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I always struggle with that title, wasn't exactly my favorite in the universe world of Hunger Games, so I am a little apprehensive. This book is actually shorter than I thought it was going to be. Ballads is pretty long, and this is only, I think, about like 370 or 380 pages, something around there. But yeah, I am just excited to dive in. So we are going to send it over to me for part one updates and initial thoughts on this book. So, jumping into it, obviously, I knew that this book really was just a prequel about Haymitch. I did not know anything about it. I know there was like excerpts released and like snippets and sneak peeks and things. I avoided all of that. I did not know anything going into this book, so I was immediately blown away, much like I'm sure a lot of people were when they found out that Haymitch's birthday is Reaping Day. That is kind of your first crazy lore drop in in this book, and I would say thus far, just as overall thoughts on the first part of the book, the first 9 chapters, is that it's just really, like, emotionally devastating in a way that I have not reread the Hunger Games series, in a while. I have reread the series completely 3 or 4 times, and I've read The Hunger Games a total of 6 times. The last time I did a reread of the whole series was in college, and the last time I reread The Hunger Games was right during my senior year of college. So that was in 2020. It was right before the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out. So it's been a long time since I've revisited this world. As an adult, like the books just hit so much differently, and overall, I'm just having this immense sadness reading this book for our characters, knowing kind of what's going to be happening and what is going to be, the outcome or the fate of the characters, especially Haymitch's family. I was really tearing up during the first and second chapters, knowing that Haymitch is, so worried for his family, and ultimately they are going to be killed. I don't know if they are killed in while Haymitch is in the arena. I suspect that it is going to be done afterwards, after he gets out of the arena, and I suspect that this book is going to not speed run the arena, but we're going to get through it before the last couple of chapters. I would suspect that the last 4 or 5 chapters is going to be out of the arena and really seeing the progression of Haymitch as a character to where he ends up in the Hunger Games. And something I keep thinking about a lot as well is how the movie is going to be adapted from this book. Obviously, we know we're getting a movie in November of 2026. So I'm just kind of thinking about how the adaptation is going. I really am wondering who they are going to get to play Haymitch and some of the other characters that I will get into in a second here. Would honestly love if the end of the movie, obviously, I haven't gotten to the end of the book yet, but the end of the movie, I would love if we did sort of like a transition shot where we have young Haymitch sitting down after everything, mentoring his first set of tributes from District 12, and then it kind of like does a time lapse of him in the same spot, just kind of aging until slowly he morphs into Woody Harrelson, and we get Jennifer Lawrence and Josh Hutcherson like sitting down. And whether that's a brand new scene or just like some sort of insert shot from the first Hunger Games movie, I don't know, but I would absolutely love that. I think it would be so fun. But anyway, getting back to some of our other characters. So we've met the other tributes. Well, I guess first and foremost is that um, like this book just flat out has really admitted that the Hunger Games reaping is rigged. And I don't know if that's been a theory floated around in the past. It's definitely something that I've thought about, obviously, with Catching Fire and the Quarter Quell being rigged. And I think they make that a little bit more clear in the movie, but I think in the book it's left a little bit more ambiguous as to whether it was rigged or not, as far as what the 75th Quarter Quell was going to be. But in this novel, we see that Haymitch's name is not called at the end of the reaping ceremony, and we have a character named Woodbine Chance, I think was the character's name, who gets reaped instead and is actually the one who or he gets shot, and they have to refilm the whole reaping ceremony, and Haymitch kind of in the fray is protecting Lenore Dove, his girlfriend, who we know is related to Lucy from Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes, and there's just a lot of character connections going on, but we see that Haymitch's name is not the one that is pulled. And when they do the reaping again, and it's kind of refilmed for what's going to be aired for the Capitol and the other tributes, it's whatever name was on that piece of paper doesn't matter because Drusilla, our escort or kind of character, the equivalent of Effie in this book, is just said Haymitch because that's what was decided after he threatened a peacekeeper. So that was really interesting, and I'm loving that aspect. We've also gotten a little bit of that from BT, who shows up as a mentor for District 3, and his son is one of the tributes. He's essentially being punished for what he did in his games, and now he has to watch his son like die. And that leads to one of my more kind of heartbreaking line so far in this book that was said, and I wish I would have put like a tab to come back to it, but it was something along the lines of like, what could be worse than sitting here and like watching your loved ones die? And, it's just kind of sad knowing that Haymitch is going to have to sit and watch his loved ones die eventually. Going back to the reaping scene though, and some of our other characters, the other tributes that we have are Luella McCoy, Maisley Donner, and Wyatt something. I can't remember Wyatt's last name at this moment. The one I want to focus on, kind of here in this update clip, is Maisley because we know that Maisley is the twin sister of Marilee, who I believe is Madge's mother from the Hunger Games from the first book. And so we, kind of know that they were twins and that they were close. And we get a line in Catching Fire from Katniss's mother that she was close friends with Maisley. And I was reading the reaping scene, and it was discussing how Maisley was kind of with two girls and their blonde hair, and one of the girls was Marilee, the other was Astrid. And I'm thinking that this probably could end up being Katniss's mother later on in the book because we never got Katniss's mother's first name. She was always just Miss Everdeen, or Mom, because we were in Katniss's head, so we never learned her first name. Seeing all of these different characters who we're so familiar with from the Hunger Games 25 years or 24 years before everything happens and kind of how they get to the characters that they are. Obviously, how could I not mention that Haymitch's trib or what are they called? Mentors in the games are Mags and Wyrus, who we obviously see in Catching Fire very heavily and play a large part in the revolution. And Plutarch, obviously, I have not mentioned yet, but Plutarch is not a game maker. I guess he's more like a reporter type character, like an escort almost for District 12. He is the one doing the interviews and filming them and kind of directing them. Interesting to see him, and you can really see the seeds of how he joins the rebellion already in just the first part of this book, specifically kind of chapters 8 and 9. And we have obviously Snow just come up in chapter 9, and he is basically telling Haymitch that, like, I am planning these games for you to die after what you pulled, because at the parade there is an accident and Luella, one of the tributes for District 12, ends up dying. Who really, that rocks Haymitch because he's very close to Luella and they were planning on being allies in the games. After that happened, then Haymitch was like running through the streets with Luella, and he basically brings her to Snow's palace, and Snow sees, not sneezes, he sees. And now we are meeting Snow, and Snow is like, "You're gonna pay for that," essentially. So really fascinating, just really interesting. I am very curious to see where part two goes. Obviously, we've left off with kind of a reveal that Luella has been resurrected. I'm assuming that it's more of like a Mutt type of situation, and she's just basically going to be a stand in the games. And I would imagine that she's going to be programmed to kill Haymitch. But obviously, we know from Catching Fire, kind of how Haymitch's games ends, more so that him and Maisley become allies, and I think they're down to the final five, and then Maisley dies, and then it's just Haymitch and the District 1 victor. I think it's a female victor, and she like throws an axe, and he dodges it, but uses the force field, and it comes back and hits the victor, and then that's how Haymitch wins. So interesting, fascinating. Yeah, I'm really loving this book so far. I think the themes of this book are, kind of about war propaganda and kind of being used as a pawn in kind of war and politics. And I think we'll see that much more towards the end after the games. And I can't wait to see where part two goes. All right, hello and welcome to update number 2 of Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. We have just finished part 2, so we're now on chapter 19, and a lot of my thoughts are kind of really centered around the last 2 chapters here that I just read. I'll start with those and then go backwards. So, one, that I was really thinking that Haymitch is doing a lot of things. It's like, rebellious in a way. And he kind of is doing all of this with the assumption that only he, I guess I don't need to hold up the book, but he's doing all this with the assumption that he is the only one who will be giving repercussions, or that this is going to matter to. When I think we just like, well, I guess we as the reader obviously know that that's not true, but I feel like Haymitch should be able to suss that out as well, that whatever he does to kind of ruin the games or go against the capital, like, is definitely gonna come back to hurt not only him but his loved ones. I mean, he quite literally is in the arena with Amper, who is the son of BT, and Amper is put in there, to punish BT. And that kind of is a little bit of a transition to what I'm talking about next. But to wrap up my thought, I just feel like he should be a little bit smarter, but I'm also kind of justifying to myself, I don't know if this is the point, but I'm justifying to myself that in this story, Haymitch is only, what, 16 or 17? So he is still just a teenager. And I think it kind of shows that progression to how he becomes a little bit more of a strategist that we see in the Hunger Games series when the rebellion does actually come. So I kind of like that a little bit, and kind of show some character growth over the next 20 or so years. Going back to Amper, was I the only one who missed earlier that this boy is only 12? Like, this death scene that we just read at the end of chapter 18, like, oh, brutal. And this book overall, like, I've already seen some people, because today's Friday when I'm filming this. I'm planning on finishing this tonight or tomorrow night, kind of just depending on how things go. But, like, I've seen so many people talk about how this book is so hard, like, emotionally. Like, it is just really gut wrenching in a way that I don't remember the original trilogy being, and I don't know, like, where that is coming from. Obviously, it's in the writing. Like, the writing is just a little bit more brutal, and while this is definitely a YA book, I feel like most of the people reading it probably are adults. So it definitely has a little bit more of an edge, I think, to it, in a way that I like to see, because not every like adult book out there needs to be like super sexual or graphic to be classified as adult. Like, this definitely reads as very adult. We're talking about a lot of adult themes. There's, a lot of heartfelt heartfelt writing and emotionality to it that is making it, I think, a little bit more just like definitely the original Hunger Games trilogy, I think, reads as a young adult, like teenage trilogy that is like very original for it. And this still has that same vibe, but also has a little bit more of a maturity to it in some sort of ways. So I'm really enjoying that aspect to it. And just overall, the whole second part of the book, I thought was really good. I feel like this easily could be a part of the book that really drags, but it was done well. I liked, excuse me, I liked seeing some additional characters. We got a big Effie cameo, which was really nice to see. And I liked seeing the training that our tributes were doing and kind of the relationship between the stylist teams and kind of fleshing out the capital citizens to be a little bit more not so two-dimensional. I think we got a little bit of that starting with Mockingjay, and then I think that was what Suzanne Collins was kind of attempting to do or trying to do in Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes a little bit. But obviously, our main character being in that Snow, who we know is just like an evil dictator, I think didn't land so much with people. So I think in this book, we're getting some of those side characters that we got in the original trilogy. And so we can kind of see how they are, at their hearts, like good people, but they're also victims of the state in some sort of ways. And they have kind of been programmed and have seen a lot of propaganda. Obviously, a huge theme in this particular book is propaganda. They have kind of grown up in the capital, and this is all they've ever known, and they've been told that the Hunger Games are good, and it's what keeps the peace. So I'm just liking that whole aspect, and honestly, I'm just really loving this. I can remember when I read Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes, not necessarily loving every piece. I was definitely enjoying it, but this book, while it's very emotionally hard and really, really is just brutal, like, that's one of the best words I can use to describe this book is just, like, brutal. It's reading so well and so good. Being inside Hamish's head really works in a way that I, have to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical about when I heard about this book, but I think we're doing a great job of making Hamish as a teenager really spunky and, really rootable, kind of the same way that Katniss was, but in a different sort of way. Katniss is much more stoic and interpersonal, and Hamish is more kind of boisterous in kind of his characterization. And we haven't gotten to the like hardened alcoholic that we've gotten to in Hunger Games. So we're seeing a little bit more personality out of him that it took a little bit of the books to ramp up to that. So I think this is working really, really well. And as far as kind of end game thoughts on the book, obviously we're entering part 3 here, so we only have a little bit of the book left. And really, I think we're going to kind of see the end of the games here. Initially, I thought they were going to wrap up around chapter 22 or 23, but I don't really know at this point because I thought we were going to get a little bit more time in kind of the post games world with Hamish. But maybe that's only the last chapter or something. I definitely think we have to spend some time on the obviously assassination and murder of his family and girlfriend and the fallout of that. So we have a lot to get through in the next 9 chapters, only about like 100 or so pages to do it in. So I'm definitely intrigued to jump into this last part. So I'm going to start reading that right now. I just read the last 2 chapters of part 2. That's kind of why I really focused on them in this clip. But as far as the other chapters, like I said, I kind of really enjoyed just seeing the progression and the characterization of some of our capital characters as well as the tributes and Hamish himself. But yeah, I think this last part is going to be really devastating. One thing I'm kind of hoping to see is I hope we find out how Maisley dies. I know in Catching Fire, when it's described, I think she just kind of leaves Hamish when it's down to like the final 5, and then he like hears her scream or something, and then sees her face a little bit later. Like if I'm not mistaken, I think once we get down to like only 5 tributes left, the games like end pretty quickly from that. So yeah, I'm excited to see kind of the full story from Hamish's eyes on how that ends, and then obviously the aftermath is just going to be brutal. I don't know if I've talked about this in the first clip, but I definitely cried or almost cried, and then I did like tear up. Like there were tears in my eyes. I didn't have any tears fall, but there were tears in my eyes reading about Amber's death. Like let's jump into part 3 and see how this book ends. I am scared on an emotional level. So I have finished Sunrise on the Reaping. I am now done part 3. It's a little bit later on the night from my wrap up of part 2. So I've read all of part 3 in about like an hour and a half or 2, sometime around there. I've taken a break. I've eaten dinner since to kind of let my thoughts sink in. And honestly, I don't know if I have too many thoughts about part 3 itself, once again, other than the ending. So before we get there, I will just say that seeing the actual games play out and kind of the repercussions of Haymitch's actions and what he did in the arena and how he tried to sabotage the games, I found really fascinating. I thought it was really interesting. I really loved, like I said before, kind of getting an insight on Haymitch's character and where he was at in this book. And like I said, it really makes a lot of sense on how Haymitch kind of developed and became the more hardened Haymitch that we saw in the Hunger Games trilogy, the original trilogy. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed the game aspect of this. I thought it was written well. It's very brutal. Like I was talking about before, it feels kind of a lot more adult, and the games themselves. Part of that, as I stated before, is a lot of people are now reading this series as adults when they had previously maybe read it as a kid or teen. So it can be a little bit more mature. Then, in additional, I think it made a lot of sense in world and in story with this being the Quarter Quell and supposed to be, kind of the all-star edition of the Hunger Games in a sense that it's bigger and grander and more over the top. And the game makers were really trying to just like hammer in how just how much they kind of have control and just wanted to create like a show, like a spectacle of some kind. So I just really enjoyed that aspect. But then we kind of get to the end where Haymitch ultimately does win his returning to District 12, which ultimately was just really sad. Like the last like 3 chapters of this book are just absolutely like gut wrenching and heart pulling and just something that like I cried. I cried. I don't normally cry at books. I don't cry a lot at books or movies or songs, anything like that. I'm a very emotional person. No one will say that that is untrue. But as far as media making me emotional to the point where I am crying, that takes a lot. And so the fact that this book did that is just like crazy. And obviously, I haven't mentioned a rating yet so far, but like, quite literally, how could this be anything else besides a 5 star? Like, no notes, practically perfect. Like, almost everything that you could want. And I was going into this book looking for potential pitfalls or criticisms, and I'm sure there are some nitpicks out there that people could pick up on, but I didn't. I really enjoyed this all the way through, and I really enjoyed how Suzanne Collins really got you to just be in such an emotional place in the story. Obviously, The Hunger Games as a story itself, just the concept is quite literally horrifying, and so you already are kind of on edge on an emotional level of some sorts. And so having a character that we know so well and ultimately knowing where they end up, some may say that's a little bit of a cheat to kind of get you emotionally invested in the story, but I think if anything it kind of works to what the story is doing even better, to where it is so brutal and kind of vibrant with its violence and kind of over the top, and not gory. Like I was saying before, the book is not gory. It's not like gratuitous for being gratuitous sake. It's very just kind of simple in the way that it happens. Of course, is some kind of gore and brutality, like when Welly gets their head chopped off. You don't see that on screen necessarily, but kind of just being in Haymitch's head and walking up onto that scene, to me, is just as horrifying as being an outsider seeing that take place and seeing that happen. I think if anything, it's scarier to not know exactly what happened and to walk up on that scene and see that happen and see this just absolutely, gross, emotionally devastating event in front of you that you really in a lot of ways could have potentially prevented. It's amazing. Like it's just so amazing. This is so good. The emotional highs and lows of the book, because when Haymitch gets these wins when he's trying to sabotage the arena, like trying to blow up the tank, or when he creates the bomb and is trying to blow up like the force field and the generators, like you want him to have these wins and you feel happy for him, but ultimately like you always know in the back of your head that it doesn't matter, and that he does like it, all these things that he's doing, that he's trying, just are for naught. One of the saddest scenes to me was the scene when Haymitch kind of is starting his victor's ceremony, and they're replaying the highlights of the games, and he's kind of sitting there talking about how all of these things that he experienced were edited out of this kind of broadcast. And I thought that was really interesting because obviously we have heard a little bit about Hamish's games. We didn't know a ton, but we knew some from Catching Fire when Katniss and Peeta watched it. So seeing those events be woven into the story was really interesting. But then you can so clearly see why these particular moments were picked. And obviously that's not what Suzanne Collins meant when she wrote Catching Fire and wrote in these particular scenes for Haymitch's games, but to craft a story around those existing scenes and still make them interesting and impactful to the plot and story and theme and messaging of the book. Masterful. Masterclass. Suzanne Collins. Like, go girly pop. Check mark for you. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have much more to say. I think I'm going to kind of end my part 3 wrap up here. So next you'll kind of see the quick outro and just little wrap up thoughts. Probably going to film that tomorrow and let this kind of sink in. I don't know how much more I have to say, so that may be pretty quick of a wrap up. But yeah, this was such a pleasure. I'm so happy that this was like amazing and fantastic, because I was a little disappointed with Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes. I think a couple of people were. So I'm definitely happy to have finished this and that it was just absolutely fantastic and amazing. So I will go let it sit with me, let it marinate a little bit overnight, and then I will come back at you tomorrow with a quick little final wrap up thoughts on this video. And yeah, so let me go do that. All right, welcome back to the end of this video. I finished Sunrise on the Reaping last night. I'm wearing purple. I'm wearing a workout shirt, and I put on my stole from graduation as to do a little purple and gold action. Let me zoom out just a tiny bit. Yeah, so I thought it was fitting for this wrap up clip to kind of dress in purple and gold in honor of the color scheme of this book. So yeah, I finished this last night, and I don't think I have many more thoughts after my update from last night. Still is a 5 out of 5, obviously. Still love this book and this book series. And I just can't believe that this book was as good as it was. As I stated before I started the book, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes wasn't my favorite book. It was like a 4-star for me. So, coming from the original trilogy, which I absolutely loved and adored both when I read it the first time as a teenager and then multiple there times after as like a younger adult, I didn't know how this was going to stack up. And I would say as far as, like, in the series canon, like, obviously this is a 5 out of 5 stars, but it is still my number 4th, I guess, if you're ranking the book's favorite. There's just something about the original trilogy that I have such an attachment to that I don't know if any book in this universe could ever top that original trilogy. But that is not to take away from the merits and how good this book is. If this does top people and become people's new like number one favorite Hunger Games book, I'm so happy for them about that, and I can see why you would like that would be the case, especially if you relate to Haymitch more as a main character than Katniss, because they're very similar and very different at the same time. And being inside Haymitch's head was really interesting and was such a wild roller coaster of emotions and ups and downs, and mostly downs. But like I stated last night, some of those little wins that we get for Haymitch as a character really keeps you and him going. And the way that the overall themes of like propaganda in this book and the way that like the media manipulates like the everyone, and they can make anyone into a hero and a villain, and that was just really interesting to see. And as someone who is very tuned into specifically like reality TV media, you always hear people complaining about like the reality TV edit, or that didn't happen the way it happened. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves of people who are on reality TV. But obviously, in the world of the Hunger Games, like that is very different when things are so just changed. The narrative is radically changed. It has major implications not only for yourself, but for your loved ones. And once again, it goes back to some of those original themes that you see in the original Hunger Games, to where you can fight and fight and fight for change, but in some sort of ways, like you can't outrun your destiny. And I think that's kind of symbolized perfectly in like Prim's death in the original trilogy. Obviously, our the original trilogy is capped off because, or kicked off, excuse me, because Katniss volunteers for Prim to go into the games, just for Prim to make it basically to the very end of this rebellion, this revolution, just to not make it. That's really heartbreaking, but ultimately that was Prim's destiny. And some of those same themes are present in this particular book. So, yeah, I don't know if I have much more to say. I just kind of wanted to come in here and wrap things up and kind of put a final cap onto this video. So, if you have finished this, please, please, please let me know. I'm talking to a couple of friends over text and Instagram. And while I'm not doing any particular buddy reads for this particular book, I'm loving hearing the discussions that other people are having. I'm loving having the discussions myself about this book and how it's emotionally impacting so many people. So thank you, Suzanne Collins, for creating such a fantastic series, and a series that still holds up 15 years later, and that people of all ages really can enjoy. Thank you so much for watching this video. And until another video, I will talk to you then. Thank you so much. Bye.